Hey, real lifers, have you ever felt like you had to hide something? That you were afraid of being the real you? Probably it's one of the most courageous things I've done is coming out. Here at Real Life English, we believe that no matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. So, in honor of June, which is Pride Month, I am, for the first time ever, sharing my personal story of coming out and finding my pride. So for anyone who doesn't know, because I haven't talked about it openly here, I am gay, and it's something that took me a very long time in my life to accept. Ksenia and I had a powerful conversation all about vulnerability, courage, gender and sexual identities, and so much more. So I came from a small town, just to give some context, and I think a big part for me was just not having role models. So this is a great opportunity for you to practice your English listening and learn tons of vocabulary and expressions you can use in your everyday English. Aw, yeah, global citizen. This is Ethan from Real Life English, where every single week it is our mission to take you beyond the classroom to speak English confidently and naturally, to connect to the world, and to actually use your English as the doorway to living your greatest life.
Welcome back to our podcast. Hello, everyone. Hi, Ethan. This is a very special episode today we're having because it's both very personal and profound. We are going to talk openly and honestly about the topic of coming out. And when preparing for this podcast, I was pondering on courage. And I found this quote that I found very fitting for today's episode. I wanted to share it with you and with the audience. So it goes like, it takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. So I would just to start with that. Was there any moment in your life where you felt particularly courageous?
Oh, wow. That's a deep question. Before I answer that, I did want to pay attention to some of the interesting vocabulary that you used there. So you said that you were pondering on this. So maybe you could start off with, what does ponder mean?
To ponder is to think, right? To contemplate something, to think.
I don't know if you've ever seen Winnie the Pooh in English, but this is something that for me, I remember a lot in those cartoons. He would sit under this tree and he'd be like, ponder, ponder, when he was thinking deeply about something.
Nice, so sweet.
And of course, you said that we're talking about the topic of coming out. And I thought I would ask you, do you know why we say this, coming out?
I don't know. It would be interesting to know. As I explain it to myself, is like, let's say people may tend to be more reserved, like as if in a shell. And when you come out of your shell, when you open up, this is coming out. This is how I explained, but I don't know if that's how accurate it is.
That's a really great interpretation, because we do have the expression to come out of your shell means to, in some sense, leave your shyness behind. Mm-hmm. But it's actually related to another expression, which is to come out of the closet. Okay. And I actually did ask ChatGPT, why do we say to come out of the closet for this, for when someone comes out as having a certain gender identity or sexual identity? And the reasoning behind it is because of an old expression that we would use the closet basically to say someone's secrets. Like there's another expression that if you have skeletons in your closet, it means you have some dark secrets that you're hiding. So to come out of the closet basically means to make those secrets known. And for so many people who have different gender or sexual identities, they may be living a very large part of their life having to hide those, having to pretend to be something that they're not. Probably it's one of the most courageous things I've done is coming out. So for anyone who doesn't know, because I haven't talked about it openly here, I am gay. And it's something that took me a very long time in my life to accept. And even beyond accepting it, to actually wear that as something that I'm proud of, as being a part of my identity. And I was getting to this metaphor of, coming out and everything, that very much so it feels like for much of my life, I was wearing this mask. And I think that so many of us have some skeletons in our closet, some secrets, some part of ourself that we haven't fully accepted. And so even if you're not gay or you're not a different gender identity or anything within this world of LGBTQ plus, you probably have had some experience where you couldn't fully be authentic, or maybe it was in certain situations around certain people you feel like you couldn't be fully authentic. For me, wearing this mask for a large part of my life was very much something that I didn't even realize anymore was a mask that I was wearing, because it was so strong that it wasn't even something I was conscious of. And it took me until I was in my mid-20s to actually have this awareness, to have some experiences that made me start to question and be more aware of that mask that I was using as a coping mechanism.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because, you know, every person comes to it at their own moment, their own point in life. Somebody can doubt during their whole life, and others may know, I don't know, since middle school. So do you remember that moment? Was it like a long period for you, like of self-doubt and like not being very sure? How did you approach that, and how you personally accepted that?
Right. I came out very late, which is all relative, right? But something that nowadays would probably be considered late, because as you said, I think nowadays for most people, at least living in Western cultures, it's easier to become aware and to own that part of your identity earlier. But it wasn't until I was 27, 28 that I came out to the close people in my life. And it was only that I was able to start questioning that mask and everything, like I mentioned, when I was in already my mid-20s, so probably like 25 or so. And why did I wait so long? So I came from a small town, just to give some context. And I think a big part for me was just not having role models. So I didn't have anyone in my life that I could point to who was gay, or, you know, who was somewhere on the LGBTQ plus spectrum that I could see led a successful life, was healthy, was happy, and so on. And nowadays, which is something I think that, you know, gay people always do, is pointing to that the people who came after, the people who have had the way paved for them, we could say.
Oh, can you repeat that expression, please, and define it?
That if you've had the way paved for you, so we pave a street, for example. So if you've had the way paved for you, then it's like it's been made easier by the people who came before. And we've been bringing up a lot of vocabulary and expressions. So if you feel like you're missing anything, I highly recommend that you listen to this on the RealLife English app, because you can follow along with an interactive transcript and get vocabulary flashcards, so you never forget all the new words and expressions that you're learning today, so that when you get an opportunity to speak, they'll be regularly available for you and you won't freeze up. What I was saying about the role models is that nowadays it's, in a sense, easier for people, or at least there's more role models, that even if you come from a small town, there's so much media, there's so many great TV series and movies, and, you know, you can see it on any sort of social network or anything like this. So people who now are going through the experience, that maybe they don't identify them as part of that heteronormative reality, they can probably become aware of that much sooner, because they can have role models on TV, even if they don't see those in their surroundings in their life. But when I was coming up, I didn't know about any series like this. There was one that was very iconic that I've watched but a few years ago, called 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗶𝗀𝗵, that I actually looked up when this was on. It was 2000 to 2005, but I'd never had heard of it at that point. Probably if I had seen it, it might have helped me to look in the mirror more and better understand myself. But that was a really big thing. And also just growing up in the 90s and 2000s, the reality in the United States, as it was in many places, was that gay was always seen as being less. So I remember growing up and hearing, and probably even using this myself, like friends, my brother, and so on, using the word gay to refer to things that were bad. You know, you say like, that's gay, meaning like that's not cool or that's not good. And like I mentioned before, the word queer being thrown around and other things. So just growing up in that, I think that even though it was probably more subconscious, I was just having kind of pounded into me that wouldn't be ideal. And furthermore, what I was having created as more of an ideal was, you know, growing up, getting married as a man, getting married to a woman, having children, and so on, and sort of living the American dream. And so it was very hard for me to even imagine any reality that could be different from that. So even though as I was growing up, there were signs, and we have a really nice expression in English called hindsight is 2020. 2020 refers to having perfect vision, and hindsight refers to looking back. So we say this when we say, when something in the past was obvious, but now, but back then when you were in that moment, it was something that wasn't so obvious. So in hindsight, for me, there were many signs, obviously, but I saw those signs in the moment, but I made all sorts of excuses, that it's just curiosity, or it's just, a phase that I'm going through, or this must happen to everyone, but just no one's talking about it, and so on. But, now that I have fully opened up to that and I fully accept that identity, it's much more obvious. But in that moment, I completely repressed it.
Yeah, I think many people in many questions, and especially in such important questions and self-identity, they go through this phase of self-doubt, then resistance, and of course the role of those examples, of those role models of the community plays such a huge part in whether you step on this path or not, right? Like whether you embrace it or not. And I can see here like the connection with English learners, especially at the very beginning, when they have any doubts, any fears of how to speak English. Community plays such a role here, because you can, when you find your tribe, when you know that there are people around you who you can trust, who can support you, you are empowered by them, and you face your fears, right? So I don't know if at any moment in your journey you felt that support of gay community, because like you were saying just now, this is something you lacked back then, where you was like in self-doubt, when you were in self-doubt. But later, maybe in the journey, did that moment come?
Yeah, I feel like that's actually been more recent in the last handful of years. I think before that, you were asking about courage and stuff. I think what ultimately gave me the courage was that, when I was in my mid-20s, I finally, because at some point it's something that you can't really repress anymore, I did start experimenting and everything, and I even had I had a boyfriend when I was 26, my first boyfriend, but it wasn't a healthy relationship because he was also in the closet, so it wasn't helping to give me any sort of courage or any sort of awareness over this part of my identity. But when I moved to Barcelona, I was very fortunate to meet my now husband, Jordi, and I think what gave me a lot of courage was actually being able to spend time with him and his family and his friends and so on, and some of his friends also being gay. So like being able to, because I didn't have this role model when I was younger, being able to see him with his family, to see his family didn't treat him any differently, like loved him and fully accepted that part of his identity, and seeing his friends who were also gay, that, they had a normal life. They weren't these strange people, which seems very silly to me now, of course. But back then, just being able to see that gay people could live completely normal lives and be happy and be healthy and be surrounded by loved ones and so on, for me, it opened my mind. So I think having that was what gave me the courage to start talking to more people about it, to coming out to some friends. I came out first to, I think, more friends that it would have hurt if they didn't accept me or if they rejected me somehow, but that I could have lived with it. But I was maybe very fortunate that all of my friends had a very positive response, were very supportive, were very happy for me, that I was in a relationship with someone that I loved.
You're talking about your American friends, right?
Well, at that point I was in Barcelona, so I started with friends here, but eventually, I talked to my best friends in the States.
Because I also wanted to ask, was there at that point any difference in acceptance between like American friends and maybe European friends? Because I don't know, but maybe, again, that may be subjective, but maybe Europe is more open, more tolerant than America is. It seems like that. I'm not sure if I'm correct.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on where you are, because what you're saying is probably correct for a lot of European cities. But it's also true for a lot of American cities.
Especially bigger cities.
New York or San Francisco, for example, or even Denver, which is the capital of my home state. There's, a very large gay community there and everything. And I think that you could feel very liberal there. But there's more conservative parts of the United States where you might not feel as comfortable, for example, walking down the street, holding your partner's hand, or
even today.
Yeah. But I think most big cities, they tend to have their communities and have at least areas where you can feel complete ownership over that part of your identity.
Maybe for people who were not so interested in that topic, never paid attention to all the vocabulary, could you just define what are those letters stand for, LGBTQ plus?
Yeah, so I had to actually look up some of them. I know the LGBT, that's the older term, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans. And after that, they've added on QIA. The Q is for queer, which is actually a nice word because it used to just mean something that was strange. And then it was used as a derogatory term, meaning a term that's insulting for anyone who was part of the gay community. And now it's been reappropriated, meaning that now it's used as a word of empowerment for anyone who is not part of the heteronormative culture. Heteronormative meaning the culture where being heterosexual is seen as the norm or what's normal. And so that's now part of even the acronym there. So queer. Then there's intersex, and this is a term that is used to refer to someone who was born with aspects of both sexual genders. So it can be biological, or it can be even beyond this. It can be like related to hormones, for example. And then finally, there's A, which is, there's actually can be two definitions for this. So one is ally. An ally is someone who's your friend, who supports you. So ally are the people who, even though they don't identify as any of these gender or sexual identities, they feel somehow supportive. Maybe they have a child or a family member who is, identifies as one of these, or they just otherwise feel drawn to the movement. And the other definition is asexual, meaning that someone who is not sexually attracted to men or women.
Okay, thanks so much. You were talking about your friends, so you first chose your closest friends to open up to.
Obviously, the most difficult thing is coming out to your family, because that's, at least for most people, being rejected by your family would be much higher. And I never had any fear about them rejecting me, because my parents, they're not very conservative. They're not, they raised me, making me always feel like I was very loved. So I didn't believe that they would disown me, meaning that they would, which happens to some people when they come out to their parents, that they say, like, I no longer consider you my son or my daughter or my child. I didn't see that happening to me, but of course it still took a lot of courage to tell them. And I told my dad first, because I think it was more difficult for me to imagine, my mom. Ultimately, it came out well. It was difficult for them at first because, it was them being able to see me in a new light and accept that part of my identity. And it really would have been no walk in the park without Jordy, because he was very supportive. He never pressured me or anything like that. He allowed me to have my own journey, my own time.
You were already dating Jordy when you came out to your parents, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I couldn't have done it without him, I don't think, or it would have been much more challenging without him.
By the way, you use this phrase, walk in the park, when telling about this. Can you define that?
When we say that something is no walk in the park, we mean that it's not an easy task.
So how did they accept that? How did they take it?
When I first talked to him, actually, I talked to my dad first, as I said, and one thing that was difficult was I was here and they were there, so it's not even doing it in person. But my mom was traveling for business, and my dad, after I told him, he was putting a lot of pressure because he felt like he needed to talk to my mom about this. And so I called her. I wanted to wait till she was home, but I called her at this conference, and she called me back on a break. And obviously this was not the news that she was expecting to get. So I'm sure that didn't help too much. What really helped was them two meeting Jordy, meeting his family, and seeing what great people they were. they are. And I even remember going to lunch one day, just me and my mom, and her asking, like, are you sure? Is this like, because I think for any parent, especially, again, it's, even today, I think we live in a very heteronormative world. For a parent, it can feel like, oh, your child's going to suffer more. They're going to have a more difficult life, and you don't want anything that makes their life more difficult. I think your job as a parent probably feels like you want to make your child's life as easy as possible. So I remember her asking, are you sure? And it's like, yes, it's who I am. And then her saying, that I will always love you no matter what. And so, just feeling basically that nothing had really changed deep down. I think it was just wanting to make sure that I wasn't making a mistake or, doing something that would make my life more of a challenge.
And of course, every parent, who is really close and open-minded the first words would be like, I still love you. Yeah, no matter what.
The good thing that I believe is starting to change as a culture, or has been changing in the last years, at least in Western cultures, is that it's losing the stigma. Stigma is a negative point of view that people have about a thing. So it's losing that stigma of it being something that's negative or that's going to make your life worse, and it's starting to take on more of a positive aspect of you're owning who you are, you're owning that identity, and so because of that you can live a happier life. So ultimately, I think more and more parents are even educating their kids about that earlier. That's like really good to see, is that, if it's okay if you're like, you can love who you want to love, you can be who you want to be. If that for them means that, that they are attracted to the same sex, that their partner will be of the same sex, if that means that even they don't identify as the gender that they were biologically born with, if they don't identify with any gender at all, that all of those things are okay, because ultimately, as long as they're happy, right? As long as they're able to fully embrace being who they are. And that's, in the end, I think that's what all of us are trying to do, even if we're not talking about LGBTQ plus or anything like that.
Exactly.
All of us are just trying to figure out, who are we, and, and trying to become ourselves.
Like you said, back in the day, this whole phenomenon, it wasn't just like so present in our culture. You couldn't like see it in the movies, in everyday life, right? But it is like it has changed. Even children movies have some characters who are representative for LGBTQ. It's still difficult to pronounce for me. So many letters. And, talking about my daughter, she is asking sometimes, like, for example, even the movie, in a cartoon or in a movie, animation movie, she sees like two boys or two girls. Sometimes back, like, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years even ago, she would ask me, but now she's not asking. She knows already. And now when we watch a movie and she sees it on screen, she no longer asks about it because she knows. And I honestly had like conversations with her, trying to, in simple language explain everything is okay if you feel it inside, that it's okay for you. And I'm so happy that for now, school or her friends, for this moment, they didn't have any influence on her. So she's still, living by that truth, what I shared with her. Because I should say about Ukrainian society, it's like 50-50. There are so many open-minded already people. And I can also say that the war has changed a lot. Like, I can literally see how people became more accepting, kinder in many ways, and towards this topic as well, like being more tolerant. But there is still a part of society who, like you said, consider it like not okay. A big part of it, I think, is religious, but not necessarily. That's why it was so surprising for me, the fact that I learned, we were recording a podcast with you about Eurovision, and this year's winner, Nemo, who is a non-binary, it was so surprising for me to learn that televoting in Ukraine gave him the highest score, 12 points, and Ukraine was the only country to give him to give them the highest score, both televoting and jury vote. That was surprising. because when I posted the next day after the Eurovision, like the post that, oh, I'm so happy they won, even some people among my closest circle were like surprised and like sent me private messages. Are you serious? Like, really? No, so it's like the society here is 50-50, I would say. By the way, Ethan, why do we use they?
So they is the neutral pronoun in English. So for people who identify as being non-binary or gender neutral, meaning that they don't see themselves as being identified by being either male or female, they usually prefer that you don't call them he or him or she or her, but rather that you refer to them as they or them or other pronouns, because there's been other pronouns that have also been invented that people feel more representative for them. And I think it's always good for us to try to be aware of this. I think on the other side too, if you are gender neutral or non-binary, since it's such a new thing, you need to be patient with people and help them to understand better and stuff and not get angry if they use the wrong pronoun at first, but to help them to, do things as you prefer to be done.
Yeah, and I just remembered that even in English, because of the character of English language, that sometimes you cannot tell by the verb, was it a woman or a man? So when you don't know the gender of a friend, for example, who was mentioned in a conversation, you can ask, so did you go with them or did you meet with them? When you don't know, was that friend he or she, right?
Right. We'll use this for babies as well, because when they're at that young age, depending how their parents dress them, of course, you're not sure if it's a boy or a girl, so you might say them. Although now, with the whole non-binary thing, there's also parents who are preferring not to assign a gender. Yeah, I wanted to comment on a couple of things you said there. The first thing you were talking about, Mira, and children in general. And the thing is that people who have some sort of prejudice, I believe, against anyone who has a different gender or sexual identity, it's usually because of something they're dealing with on their own. And that doesn't necessarily mean that some people are projecting because they themselves have not fully identified their gender or sexual identity. But for other people, it's just because it's different than what they grew up with. It's different than the reality that they knew, than the probably heteronormative reality that most adults grew up in. And kids don't have that fear yet. So there's this expression in English, love is love, that is used a lot within this community. And kids fully get that. They're able to quickly accept that because they haven't had all of these cultural things pounded into them that say that, anything less, that there's anything wrong with two men being together, two women being together, or someone that doesn't feel like the gender that they were born as, or anything else, or the non-binary even. We were talking about it even in preparing for this podcast. I talked to Jordi about it, and one of the things we were talking about that's so important is adopting curiosity. We talk about that a lot through the RealLife way, right? Is for English learners, that's really important. And I think for life in general, with topics like this, is that even me being gay, it's like some of these new things, the non-binary, it's easy to be like, that's weird. Like, what does that mean? Is that even real? And so on. But ultimately, it's like each of us are living our own truth, right? I think Nemo even says something along those lines in that song. Yeah,
it had there is this word in the lines of the song, like, this is my truth.
And I think like with any of these, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, it's like you can identify as what you want. And that's kind of what we need to arrive at understanding more, and just being really curious to ask questions. And that's why I was reminded by you saying about Mira, is because kids, they just ask questions about things in a really non-judgmental way. She probably, if she were to meet a person like Nemo, would just be asking, what does that mean that you don't see yourself as being a man or a woman? And maybe they'd hear this response, like, oh, okay, like, let's go play. Like, they're not going to judge someone or distance themselves from someone just because that person feels more comfortable with a certain identity.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's like, as we grow up, there are those, societal expectations and the frames that we should fit in, right? That kids don't have. I wanted to also ask how your life has changed since you came out.
Yeah, for me, very fortunately, it's been all positive, I'd say, which maybe waiting to come out too, I might have avoided some more difficult situations. I'm sure if I came out in high school, it would have been more difficult. When I was in high school, there was only one guy I remember who was openly gay, and I remember for myself thinking that person, that he was very strange. And now looking back on it, it's like, man, he was incredibly courageous. Coming back to your question, I think that it's only changed positively because it's made me, I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not hiding some part of myself. For so many years, I wasn't even conscious of it, but I was hiding a really important part of myself. And it's not just about sex, obviously. It's a lot of people, something else we were talking about with Jordy is that a lot of people, their form of tolerance is saying like, oh, I don't care who you sleep with. And it's not just about that. It's about who you're attracted to, who you are able to look at in the street with attraction without being judged. It's about who you're able to walk down the street holding the hand of, or go to a restaurant, or kiss in public, or go to a hotel and sleep in the same bed together. And all these other things that people who were born heterosexual take for granted. It's like, imagine with your partner going out and not being able to hold their hand, or not being able to kiss without people looking at you with disgust, or by default, like when you check into a hotel, being given separate beds. I would say it's been an uphill battle even since coming out, because it still has been a process of accepting more of that part of myself. But I would say that the last year's community has been very important, because it's been something that I have explored more, that I've looked for more experiences to be a part of. So going to different Pride events. And the reason I'm even wearing this shirt, I wore this specifically because it says...
I don't really see what's written
that,
there, so maybe you can tell us.
But it says that I didn't choose to be gay, I got lucky. So it's even something that I'm able to view nowadays as, it's a unique part of myself that I'm really grateful for, because it's allowed me to have so many experiences and to be part of a really powerful community, and to, I believe, have a really unique view on the world. So like we say here a lot, that no matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. And I don't know if I would have such an open mind to the world like this if I were not gay myself. So being part of that community, like you said, is really important. And I think my first Pride I went to was 3 years ago, and it definitely was a big shift for me.
Was it in Spain?
Starting to go to these events. Yeah, it was in the Canary Islands, actually. There's a very large gay community there, and they have a very popular Pride celebration, and it's a bit earlier because it's warmer there. And I've been going more, and like last year, a story I was thinking about in preparing for this was last year we went to the Pride in Barcelona. It was my first time actually going here. And we saw these two older men, like maybe they were in their late 50s or 60s. And they were dressed like these like Greek gods. Like one of them was like silver, one of them was gold with like a cape and these platform shoes, and with their faces painted and so on. And it really made an impression on me, because it's like, how beautiful is this, that those men that probably grew up not being able to tell anyone, how they felt, who they were, having to hide probably for a very large part of their life, like much more than me, or having to suffer through discrimination or even violence or who knows what. That nowadays they can, on a special day like this, they can, dress up and they can walk out and they can feel proud of who they are, and they can be surrounded by other people that I used this expression before, that they've helped to pave the road for, is just really beautiful to observe. So I would recommend, even if you aren't part of this community, I mean, you can be an ally, you can go to one of these events. There were so many kids at this event too last year. It's like I think 3 days in Barcelona, and there's like so many kids going. It's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And, you can just see people fully embracing and exaggerating their identity and feeling safe and feeling embraced to do so. That's helped me to embrace more that part of my identity, and truly to be proud of it, be proud of who I am.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. And still, it takes so much courage, right? And I know, and I really wanted to thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing with all of us today. And it just brings us back again to the topic of courage. How, even though you said that people who are older the members of this community who paved the way for younger generation, it is still challenging. It is still the journey that is full of, I don't know, real obstacles sometimes, right? But this is empowering in a way when you finally let yourself open up. I remember this quote that I actually read from our recent newsletter. So guys, you out there, I don't know if you're checking our newsletters. If you don't, you should do that. So much stuff there, like quotes and recommendations and wisdom and English vocabulary, right? Every Friday we send out our newsletters. So the quote from recent newsletter was about courage. Let me read it. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. So just like Ethan, just like you told us today, that your life became more rich, right? And so much more colorful after you came out of your closet. I don't know if you planned to give any tips, recommendations, or become an inspiration for anyone still holding it back and hiding.
I wasn't something necessarily I was preparing for, like hopefully just in listening to my story, listening to maybe if you came across this just because you were coming to learn English, maybe it inspires you if you are someone who have questions about your own identity that you'll explore more. And what I would say just from my own experience is, sooner or later, you're going to, if you want to be happy, at least you're going to have to accept that part of yourself. You're going to have to come to terms with it. And you're going to have to open up to the people around you, the people that are important to you. So there's no time like the present. I would say is stop resisting it, because like a happier life is on the other side of that. And I'm sure it's why I resisted it too for so long, is because it was very painful to even imagine going through that. But ultimately I came out on the other side, and I think I was very fortunate to have such loving, supportive people in my life.
Yeah.
But I believe that anyone can find at least one friend or one person who is able to support them through that journey, and just being curious and exploring. And even for people who don't see yourself anywhere on the spectrum of LGBTQIA+, all of us have, like I was saying earlier, all of us have those parts of ourselves that we haven't fully come to accept. And I think a big part of being gay or being anywhere else on the spectrum is vulnerability. So you have to have tremendous vulnerability, and it's like something you have to practice daily. It took me a long time to even, refer to having a partner who was another man, like when people would ask me, and to say my husband and so on, because now we're married, of course. I was going to say this because I think it can be, hopefully it's an inspiration too for whatever it is that, maybe it's just that you have that part of yourself that's more nerdy, or that's, as long as it's not something that hurts anyone else. I think that we need to look for more opportunities to practice that vulnerability, to have the courage to open up and to be fully ourselves. And before we transition to our kick-ass clip, there's one more quote that I wanted to share. So we're having a few quotes today. But in researching this, I came across it again, and it's from Oscar Wilde. And it says that, be yourself, everyone else is taken. So it's really nice. Our journey as human beings, no matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. And our journey as being human beings is to really embrace our true uniqueness as an individual as well. And I think doing that also allows us to connect more with each other.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So let's jump into today's kick-ass clip.
Let's do it.
So Ksenia, we're talking about the whole aspect of community and pride. And many people may wonder, why do we have pride in June? Why are we speaking about this now? And we thought that it would be really interesting to bring for you guys to today's episode a little bit of history of where did the movement come out of, and why do we celebrate Pride Month and Pride in June. So we found a really great clip that talks all about what's called the Stonewall riots, which really was like a tipping point, we could say. A tipping point is something that happens that causes a chain reaction. So many things to happen that lead to oftentimes a shift in reality. So let's check out our kick-ass clip for the day.
And Ethan, before we play the clip, could you please give us some context? By the way, I'm not sure what Stonewal is. Could you tell about that?
Yeah. So to give people some context, the US is pretty liberal now. I think that gay marriage is legal throughout the United States and so on, but obviously it wasn't always that way. In the 1950s and 60s, homosexuality was actually considered illegal in 49 states. And in the states, we have a federal system, so each state can create their own laws concerning this, but it could be anything from having to pay a fine to actually going to jail for this if you were caught publicly in any sort of act of homosexuality. And of course, if you were openly part of the gay community, you could also suffer violence, harassment, discrimination. So it was a very difficult time to be gay. Now, in cities like New York City, that are more liberal and so on, there were these sort of safe havens, meaning a place where people could feel that safety to be who they are and to express their identity and to meet other people from the community. And one very popular bar for this was the Stonewal Inn. Now, how did that one become to be popular was because it was owned by the mafia, and they would basically bribe the police to look the other way because they could make a lot of money off of the gay community. And they even would take advantage, the mafia, to extort some of the patrons, meaning that they would sort of like blackmail them, threatening to out them. This is an expression too, we can say it, is that you come out, but if someone outs you, it means that basically they announce that you're gay or that you have another one of these identities against your will. And despite the mafia, bribing some police, the police would still sometimes raid these bars. Raiding means that they would, go there unexpected, and they would start to find people, jail people, and so on. So, and they would even, one thing that I saw is that they would arrest people for non-gender appropriate clothing, which is just such a broad thing that it could very easily be misinterpreted and so on. So I'm sure they really abused that power. So basically, when one of these riots happened, it was, I suppose, a point where patrons of this bar had enough, and they decided to start a riot that lasted, I believe, 3 days. It went from June 28th to July 1st, and this is why we celebrate Pride in June.
June 28th, 1969. 9 police officers entered the Stonewal Inn in a raid. The patrons were fed up. As the police roughly tried to arrest bartenders and customers, many resisted. Outside the bar, people in the hundreds began rioting. They threw bottles at the police and pushed through the barricades. The police officers retreated from the crowd and locked themselves inside the Stonewal Inn. Rioters responded by setting the bar on fire. Police reinforcement arrived, and the original officers managed to get out of the burning bar. Meanwhile, the angry mob had grown into thousands. Eventually, the police were able to get the crowd to disperse, but it didn't last long. The riots continued until July 1st. While some criticized the violent and destructive riots, others pointed to the brutality and unjust treatment of the gay community. This large-scale defiance made a massive impact on society. The Stonewall riots were the beginning of the modern gay liberation movement. The riots sparked the formation of the Gay Liberation Front, the first group to publicly advocate for equal gay rights. On the 1-year anniversary of the riots, they also organized the first Gay Pride Parade. Today, Pride events are still held on the anniversary of the Stonewall riots in cities around the country and even the world. In 2016, President Obama made the Stonewall Inn and the area outside where the riots broke out a national monument. This became the first national monument celebrating gay history. The Stonewall riots may have been violent, but they marked a pivotal moment in history. No longer would people quietly endure the stigma associated with their sexual and gender orientations. Through the Stonewall riots, the gay rights movement gained mainstream visibility and a momentum that continues to this day.
Some vocab to define here. Let's take turns, Ethan. What have we, noticed?
I took note that the patrons were fed up.
Fed up.
What does it mean to be fed up with something?
So to be fed up is to no longer stand something. You can no longer accept something. So you're fed up. It comes from food. Yeah. When you
believe so,
have eaten
yeah.
so much that you no longer can eat anymore. So you're fed up. Yeah.
I wanted to highlight too that he mentions this term sexual and gender orientation. So I've been saying sexual and gender identity, but orientation means that you orient towards something, meaning that you tend to prefer something. So this is another term that's often used, sexual orientation or gender orientation.
There was a moment when they were telling that police reinforcement came. So what is a reinforcement?
Yeah, reinforcement in this context means support. So when police are dealing with some sort of crime and they're having a difficult time because there's not enough, they might call for reinforcement. So they want more police to come to help them with the situation. And he referred to, I believe, the group of people who were rioting as a mob.
Yeah, angry mob. But yeah, actually a mob is a word to refer to a group of people. Yeah, I don't know if it has a negative connotation always.
Yeah, you wouldn't just use it for like, oh, that mob over there. It's generally people who are protesting or who are fighting against something.
And pivotal moment.
A pivotal moment is very similar to what I was saying before about a tipping point. So it's a moment that causes, if something pivots, it turns. So it's a moment that causes a turn, a change. So what did you think of the clip, Ksenia?
That was educational. I mean, like, I've never checked history about the Pride Parade and everything, so it was new for me. That was interesting. And of course, if anyone would want to learn more and dig deeper, you would want to watch like more documentaries. But that was enough for me to at least see how it started. The moment, again, coming back to courage. In any, like, I don't know, protest, right? There is always this moment when there is that one courageous person that takes this first stone and breaks the window or something. Right. Yeah, or leads the crowd.
For me, it's very inspirational as being a gay man myself, because I had heard about the Stonewall riots, but this is actually the first time I actually investigated what it really was. I knew that it was something that was instrumental in helping to start in a sense, being able to be more open as a community, the gays, and to gain more rights in the United States and beyond the United States. I liked learning about that and really seeing, these people who fought to pave the way. I've been using that term a few times and knowing what they went through.
And I don't know if you've watched it, Ethan, but this clip also somehow reminded me of the movie I watched that was about the civil rights movement. The movie is called Rusting, same as the main character's name. And he was that powerful and charismatic person behind the whole event and this speech, Martin Luther King's speech. You remember that there were like just thousands of people, and he had, if I remember well, less than a month to organize everything. So if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. Really, really nice movie. And why it reminded me of that, because he was openly gay, even in those times, and that brought him a lot of like obstacles in his career. That's why we didn't hear a lot about this person.
It's very, very impressive. I'll have to check out that movie. I think a lot of things happened in this time period because there was what you were talking about, the civil rights movement, also for women, the feminist and equality movement, the bra burning. This was very, very famous in the 60s. So it was a very pivotal moment in many respects for the United States. All right, Ksenia, I'm curious, who is our learner of the week?
Okay, so we received this beautiful message from MD Newman, and they write, I would watch podcasts and other videos in English on YouTube. Then I would write vocabulary, phrases, and idioms with examples in my diary. And it took me plenty of time writing these down until I found a RealLife English app. It's really very helpful for me. It saves my time, and I can even watch more videos to learn English. The feature in this app to teach English is amazing. I really love this.
Yeah. Thanks so much for giving that stellar review about the app. It's so great to hear that you're having a great time learning with us. improving your vocabulary, hopefully also becoming more courageous with your speaking. So if you would like to also take your English to the next level, you have got to try out the app. You can find that. It's free to download by clicking on the link down below or in the description of this episode, or by searching for Real Life English in the Apple app or Google Play Store. So Ksenia, you brought up Nemo earlier, and I believe that in our Digging It, we'll be talking a little bit more about them.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, preparing for this podcast, I remembered the situation with Nemo and their victory on this year's Eurovision. So I had to listen to the song again several times. And it's really a perfect song, like a really nice song. I checked their Instagram account, and I was so surprised to find that they met with our Ukrainian representatives, Alona and 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗶𝗀𝗟𝗏, and they actually learned the Ukrainian lyrics of our song, representative for Eurovision, and they sang it and recorded it, and there was on Instagram that the post there was how they showed this recording to actually Alona and 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗏. That was so nice and so sweet. So I believe they plan now. I mean, Alona and 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗏, they plan to do the same, to find courage and somehow to make a rendition on the song code.
You said rendition. What does that mean, a rendition of something?
It's like your personal variant of something. So, for example, there is this song code, and if I sing it, it would be my rendition of this song, because of course I won't be able to sing it so perfectly.
They have a very impressive voice because they're able to do these opera sounds and rap, and it's a very cool song because of that, and especially the live performance was just mind-blowing. Yeah,
and I'm so happy that they won, despite all the stigma, like you said, despite all this, unacceptance from some part of population. It is a really high-level singing, and he sang really really nice. Sorry, they... They sang the song really nice. It's difficult, right? It's difficult still. We are still learning, right?
Yeah. It's something that's new. And in English, that's actually easier, that you just have they, them. Some people take on other pronouns, which can make it more complicated. So you have to ask people what they prefer, of course. But in, I think, Spanish or Catalan, it's they have to have new pronouns, but then also you need a different conjugation because there's masculine and feminine, and they're having to invent a new conjugation that makes sense for this. Not conjugation, but for adjectives and so on. I highly recommend people check out the lyrics of the song, and the performance from Eurovision was really spectacular. I think it is really their journey, to accept that part of themselves, very much like we've been talking about today. So it's a perfect bridge, and maybe a perfect note for us to finish on. And I was going to just briefly bring up too that Billie Eilish put out a new album, and I believe for her too, it was quite illuminating as well. I might not have all the data, but I believe this is the first time that she's singing about being attracted to women. So I actually haven't investigated either if she considers herself lesbian or bisexual, but one of the most popular songs on the album is about a woman that she's extremely attracted to or has a crush on, and many of the songs too refer to women. So it's pretty amazing just to see how artists can really set a great example for especially young people who might be going through some of these experiences themselves.
I have to check that out. I really like Billie Eilish, and I haven't heard about this new album. Nice.
Awesome. So Ksenia, it's been a really fantastic conversation today. I loved getting to talk to you about this, and to all of you that are listening. And yeah, if you are enjoying these lessons, a free way for you to support us is by leaving a 5-star review wherever you're listening, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other player that gives you that capability. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also support us by giving a like hitting the subscribe button and the bell down below, and that way you won't miss a single new lesson. And it also helps us a lot so other people can discover us and have a lot of fun learning with us and maybe even discovering new parts of themselves, hopefully. And remember that no matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yeah.
If you had to start over learning English from zero, what would you do? So this hypothetical situation is that let's say you have amnesia, so you're thrown back to knowing almost nothing in English. Well, Izzy, who is from Brazil but has native level English, and me, Ethan, who has learned 6 languages, are going to tell you what we would do today. What would you focus on next in your amnesic, I don't know if that's the adjective, journey, relearning English? And don't worry, even if you're already at an intermediate or advanced level of English, you're going to find these tips immensely helpful to level up on your journey.
But the number one mindset is